That night, they split the family like a deck of cards. Mom took the beauty, Dad took the athlete, and I was the leftover kicked under the table. For 15 years, I drifted through 4 foster homes while they forgot me. They have no idea the invisible child now controls million-dollar patents. They returned today to reclaim our name, but my clocks never run backward. Tonight, I will teach them that when time is up, it is gone forever. My name is Evelyn Graymont, and I learned the sound of my own value plummeting to 0 on a rainy Tuesday in November. The date is etched into the machinery of my mind with the same precision I would later use to calibrate a tourbillon. It was the 14th of November. I was 13 years old. The Graymont estate in Blackwood Heights had always felt less like a home and more like a museum where children were displayed behind velvet ropes, only to be dusted off when company arrived. But that night, the museum was being dismantled. The air inside the grand foyer was stale, smelling of wet wool and the sharp, chemical tang of packing tape. Outside, a storm was battering the slate roof, the rain sounding less like water and more like handfuls of gravel being thrown against the windows. I sat on the top step of the spiral staircase, my knees pulled up to my chest. I had made myself small, pressing my body into the shadows of the banister. In my hand, I held a small brass gear I had salvaged from the floor of the study earlier that day. It was a jagged, toothy little thing, discarded from some broken mechanism my father had thrown against the wall in a fit of rage over his plummeting stocks. It was cold and sharp, and it was the only thing in that house that felt real to me. Below me, the double doors to the library were slightly ajar. A slice of golden light spilled out onto the marble floor, cutting through the gloom of the hallway. Voices drifted up, distorted by the echo of the high ceilings, but I could hear every word. I had trained myself to listen to the vibrations of this house. I knew the heavy, rhythmic thud of my father's pace and the sharp, staccato clicking of my mother's heels. Tonight, there was a third rhythm, the shuffling of papers, the lawyer. "We have finalized the division of the liquid assets and the real estate holdings in the Hamptons." The lawyer's voice was dry, like paper rubbing together. Now, regarding custody arrangements, I squeezed the brass gear in my palm. The metal teeth bit into my skin. "Julian goes with me. My father, Richard Graymont," said. His voice was a low rumble, devoid of affection, filled only with calculation. "The boy has a future in varsity athletics. He has the Graymont build. He is a leader. I can mold him. He stays on my side of the ledger." "Fine," my mother, Catherine, replied instantly. There was no hesitation, no fight for her firstborn. "Then I get Bella. Look at her, Richard. She is the spitting image of me at 20. I have already spoken to the agency in Milan. She has a commercial face. She is an asset I can work with." Julian, the athlete, Bella, the beauty. The cards were being dealt. I waited for my name. I waited to hear who would claim the quiet one, the one who fixed the toaster when it broke, the one who sat in the corner reading manuals while the others practiced their smiles. "And Evelyn?" the lawyer asked. The silence that followed was heavy. It was a physical weight. Pressing against my eardrums, I counted the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 3. The grandfather clock in the foyer, a towering monstrosity of mahogany and gold that had stood guard over our family for 3 generations, ticked loudly in the void. 10, 11, 12. The rain lashed against the stained glass window above the landing. 20, 21. Still, neither of them spoke. I could imagine them down there, looking at each other, perhaps looking at their financial statements, calculating the return on investment for a daughter who offered neither athletic trophies nor beauty pageant ribbons. I was just Evelyn. I had surplus inventory. 30 seconds. "Richard," the lawyer prompted, his voice tinged with a discomfort that even he could not hide. "We are stretched thin as it is," my father said finally. His tone was dismissive, the way one speaks about a bad investment or a car that costs more to repair than it is worth. "The bankruptcy restructuring is brutal. I cannot take on extra overhead right now. Julian is expensive enough." "Don't look at me," my mother snapped. the ice in her voice cracking. "I am moving into a 2-bedroom condo in the city. There is barely room for Bella and her wardrobe. I am restarting my life. Richard, I cannot have baggage slowing me down." Baggage. "So," the lawyer said, and I could hear the pen scratching on paper. "We are looking at state intervention." "Let the courts handle it," my father said. It was the sentence that severed the last thread holding me to the name Graymont. "We can't liquidate any more assets. She will be fine. The system is there for a reason." I didn't cry. Tears were a biological response to emotional distress. A plea for comfort, I knew, with the cold clarity of a mechanic diagnosing a terminal engine failure, that there was no comfort to be found here. I looked down at my hand. I had squeezed the brass gear so hard that the sharp teeth had punctured the skin of my palm. A single drop of blood, dark and perfectly round, welled up and smeared against the tarnished metal. It was a fair exchange. Pain for clarity. I wasn't their daughter. It was a depreciation cost they had finally decided to write off. An hour later, the front door opened. It wasn't a family member coming to say goodbye. It was a woman in a beige raincoat, flanked by a police officer who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. My bags were not packed. I had nothing to pack. My mother had already inventoried my room and decided that the clothes she had bought me were family property to be sold or given to Bella. I walked down the spiral staircase with nothing but the clothes on my back and the brass gear hidden inside my sock, pressed against my ankle bone. I walked past the library. The door was closed now. I could hear the clink of crystal glasses. They were toasting. They had shed the dead weight. The woman from Child Protective Services placed a hand on my shoulder. Her touch was professional, firm, and entirely lacking in warmth. "Come along, Evelyn," she said. "Let's get you out of this rain." I stepped across the threshold. The cold wind of Blackwood Heights hit me instantly, biting through my thin sweater. I didn't look at the woman. I didn't look at the police car waiting to take me to the temporary shelter. I turned back one last time to look at the house. The windows were glowing with warm, yellow light. It looked like a Christmas card. It looked like a home. Inside, Julian and Bella were safe, chosen, and valuable. Behind me, in the foyer, the great-grandfather clock let out a sound that I would remember for the rest of my life. It was a groan of metal, a dying wheeze of tension being released all at once. Clunk, the rhythmic ticking, the heartbeat of the house that I had listened to every night for 13 years, simply stopped. The pendulum had ceased to swing. It hung dead center, paralyzed in the exact moment I stepped out of the family. The mechanism had failed, or perhaps it had simply decided that without me there to listen, there was no point in marking the time anymore. "Let's go," the officer said. Opening the back door of the cruiser, I slid onto the plastic seat. It smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. As the car pulled away, the Graymont estate faded into the gray wash of the rain, a glowing fortress that had expelled its only defective part. They thought they were discarding me. They thought I was the leftover. They were wrong. I wasn't scrap metal. I was the architect who had just been handed the blueprints to her own reconstruction. And as the car turned the corner, leaving the silence of the stopped clock behind, I made a vow to the rhythm of the windshield wipers. One day, I would come back, and I would be the one to decide when the time started running again. St. Jude's Home for Children was not a dungeon. It was something far worse. It was a warehouse. The facility smelled aggressively of lemon bleach and boiled cabbage, a chemical attempt to scrub away the scent of 300 unwanted children, when the heavy steel doors clanged shut behind me, severing my connection to the outside world. I ceased to be Evelyn Graymont. The intake nurse, a woman with tired eyes and a clipboard that seemed permanently fused to her forearm, took my bag. She took the cashmere sweater I was wearing, the last remnant of the life I had left an hour ago, and tossed it into a plastic bin marked donations. In exchange, I was handed a gray tracksuit that felt like sandpaper against my skin and a plastic ID card, case file 892. That was my new name. I was no longer a girl. I was a file in a metal cabinet, a statistic to be managed, a mouth to be fed with government-subsidized oatmeal. They took everything: my books, my hair ribbons, the small gold locket I had forgotten I was wearing. But they did not check my shoes. As I walked down the long linoleum hallway to the dormitory, I felt the sharp bite of the brass gear I had salvaged from my father's study. It was tucked deep beneath the insole of my right sneaker. With every step, it dug into my heel, a jagged reminder of who I was. Pain was data. Pain was proof of existence. As long as the metal cut into me, I knew I was real. And not just a ghost haunting the corridors of St. Jude's. School was a different kind of war zone. The local public school absorbed the children from the home like a body absorbing a virus with reluctance and hostility. I wore clothes that were 3 sizes too big. Donations from people who wanted to feel good about themselves without actually seeing the recipients of their charity. The sleeves of my flannel shirt hung past my fingertips, and my jeans were cinched so tight with a belt that the fabric bunched up like a folded accordion. I became a master of invisibility. I learned that if you walked close to the walls, eyes down, moving at a constant, non-threatening velocity, people's eyes would slide right over you. I did not speak in class. I did not eat in the cafeteria. I ate my apple behind the gymnasium, near the dumpsters, where the smell of rotting garbage kept the popular girls away. It was there, in the waste of the world, that I found my sanctuary. Behind the school's boiler room was an unauthorized dumping ground. It was a graveyard of obsolete technology, old toasters, cracked monitors, tangled nests of copper wire, and broken radios lay half buried in the mud. To anyone else, it was trash. To me, it was a puzzle waiting to be solved. I found a transistor radio in my 3rd week. The casing was cracked, and the antenna was snapped in half, hanging by a single thread of wire. I smuggled it back home under my oversized shirt, my heart hammering against my ribs like a piston in an engine running too hot. At night, lights out was strictly enforced at 9 o'clock, but beneath the scratchy wool blanket of my cot, a private workshop came alive. I had no tools, so I improvised. I used the metal tab from a soda can as a screwdriver. I used a stolen nail file to strip the insulation from wires. I worked by the dim, dying yellow beam of a pen light I had swiped from the janitor's cart. For the first time since the clock in my hallway stopped, I felt calm. Machines are honest. That is what I learned in the dark. My fingers stained with grease and dust. A machine does not lie to you. It does not promise to love you and then trade you for a better model. If a circuit is open, electricity will not flow. If a gear is stripped, torque will not transfer. It is a world of absolute cause and effect. If I treated the machine with respect, if I aligned the parts correctly, it would reward me. It would work. I spent 4 nights on that radio. On the 5th night, I twisted 2 frayed wires together and taped them with a Band-Aid. Static. Then, a voice. A late-night jazz station, playing a saxophone solo that sounded like liquid gold pouring through the speaker. I pressed the radio against my ear, letting the vibrations seep into my skull. I fixed it. I had taken something broken and made it whole. I was a god in a sanctuary of wool and darkness. The next day, I made the mistake of feeling proud. I took the radio to the spot behind the gym to tune it better. I did not hear him approach. His name was Marcus, a boy of 15 who had been in the system so long his eyes looked like dead screens. He was big, angry, and he hated anything that brought anyone else joy. "What is that trash?" he grunted, his shadow falling over me. I didn't answer. I just tried to shield the radio. He snatched it from my hands. "Case 892, found a toy." "Give it back," I said. My voice was rusty from disuse. Marcus grinned, a cruel, jagged expression. "It is garbage. I am helping you clean up." He raised his arm and smashed the radio against the brick wall of the gym. The sound was sickening, a crunch of plastic, the tinkle of a vacuum tube shattering. The jazz died instantly. The pieces fell into the mud, indistinguishable from the rest of the refuse. Marcus waited. He waited for me to scream, to cry, to lunge at him. That was the script. That was how the game was played. But I did not move. I stared at the scattered components. I analyzed the damage. The circuit board was snapped. The capacitor was crushed. It was beyond repair. I looked up at Marcus. I did not glare. I did not frown. I simply looked at him with the same detached, clinical scrutiny I used to examine a rusted bolt. I deconstructed him in my mind. He was just a mechanism acting on bad programming, a blunt instrument with no purpose other than destruction. "You are inefficient," I said softly. The smile faltered on his face. He took a step back. He expected rage. He could not handle the void. There was something in my eyes, a total absence of humanity, a reflection of the cold machinery I loved that terrified him. He muttered a curse and walked away, looking back over his shoulder twice. I knelt and picked up a single magnet from the wreckage. I put it in my pocket. I did not cry. Crying would not fix the radio. My salvation came 2 months later, in the form of a broken coffee maker. Mrs. Vance was the senior caseworker. She was a woman who looked like she was held together by caffeine and sheer willpower. She sat in the intake office, burying her face in her hands, while the industrial coffee machine on the counter hissed and spat steam, but produced no liquid. "Piece of junk," she muttered, slamming her hand on the side of the metal box. "Budget cuts. Can't even get coffee." I was in the office waiting for a file review. I was supposed to be sitting still, invisible, but the sound of the machine was irritating me. It was a rhythmic clicking the solenoid valve was trying to open but was jammed. I stood up. "Sit down, Evelyn," Mrs. Vance sighed. Not looking up, I ignored her. I walked to the counter. I unplugged the machine. "Hey, what are you doing?" I turned the machine around. I didn't have tools, but I saw a butter knife on her desk from her lunch. I grabbed it. "Evelyn, sit down now." I unscrewed the back panel. I reached inside, ignoring the heat radiating from the boiler. My fingers found the tube leading to the valve. It was kinked, pinched against the frame by a loose screw. I pushed the tube back into place, tightened the mounting bracket with the edge of the knife, and closed the panel. I plugged it back in. I pressed the button. A steady dark stream of coffee began to flow into the pot. The silence in the room was absolute. Mrs. Vance stared at the machine, then at me. She looked at my hands, greasy, scarred from the scrapyard, steady as a rock. "How did you know how to do that?" she asked, her voice losing its edge of exhaustion. "It was choking," I said simply. "I let it breathe." Mrs. Vance looked at me for a long time. She opened my file, flipping past the reports of my silence, my antisocial behavior, and my refusal to integrate. She closed the folder and looked me in the eye. "You don't belong here, Evelyn," she said. It wasn't an insult. It was a diagnosis. "You are going to rot in this warehouse. You need something else." 2 days later, she packed my bag. "I found a placement," she told me as she walked me to her car. "It is not a foster family. Nobody wants a teenager who stares at people like they are math problems. It is a hardship placement, apprenticeship program." "Where?" I asked. "A horology shop on the edge of the city. The old man who runs it is mean, solitary, and goes through assistants faster than he goes through socks. He rejected the last 5 boys I sent him." Mrs. Vance started the engine. "But he needs hands that can work small. And you, Evelyn, you have the hands of a surgeon." I touched the magnet in my pocket. I felt the gear in my shoe. "Does he fix things?" I asked. "That is all he does," she replied. For the first time in months, the gray fog in my chest cleared just a fraction. I wasn't going home. I was going to a workshop, and that was the only place I had ever made sense. Sterling Horology sat on a street that time had forgotten. It was a narrow, crooked building squeezed between a bakery and a laundromat, smelling faintly of yeast and warm detergent. But when I stepped inside, the air changed. It smelled of brass, cedarwood, and a specific, sharp kind of oil that I would later learn was the scent of patience. The shop was a cathedral of ticking. Hundreds of clocks covered the walls, cuckoo clocks from the Black Forest, regulator clocks with pendulums that swung like scythes, and delicate carriage clocks that sat on velvet cushions. The noise was a chaotic symphony, 1,000 different heartbeats out of sync. Arthur Sterling was behind the counter. He was a man carved from oak, with skin the texture of old parchment and white hair that stood up in static tufts. He wore a jeweler's loop attached to his glasses, making one eye look enormous and judgmental. "Mrs. Vance placed my file on the glass counter. "This is Evelyn," she said. "She is quiet, but she works hard." Arthur did not look at the file. He did not look at Mrs. Vance. He looked at my hands. "Show me," he barked. His voice was thick with a German accent, gravelly and low. I held out my hands. They were clean, but the nails were short, and the calluses from the scrapyard were still there. I held them steady. I imagined my bones were made of iron rods. They did not tremble. Arthur grunted. He reached under the counter and pulled out a wooden tray. He upended a coffee can onto it. A mountain of microscopic debris spilled out, thousands of screws, washers, springs, and gears, all mixed together in a rusted, tangled heap. Some were smaller than a grain of rice. Some were bent. It looked like a mechanical graveyard. "Sort it," Arthur said. "By size, by thread pitch, by function. If you are not done by the time I close, or if you lose your temper, you go back to the state." Mrs. Vance looked worried. "Mr. Sterling, that is impossible. It is already noon." "Goodbye, Mrs. Vance," Arthur said, already turning his back to return to his workbench. I did not complain. I did not ask for a chair. I stood at the counter and looked at the chaos. To anyone else, it was a mess. To me, it was just a problem waiting for a solution. I began. The world outside the shop window faded. The sun moved across the floorboards, stretching the shadows of the grandfather clocks until they touched the opposite wall. Customers came and went, bells chiming, but I did not look up. My universe had shrunk to the tip of the tweezers Arthur had left on the tray. I fell into a trance. It was a meditative state where hunger and thirst did not exist. There was only the satisfying click of a screw hitting the glass jar I had designated for it. Flathead, 0.5 millimeters. Phillips, 1 millimeter. Hairspring, damaged. Mainspring, intact. My back ached. My eyes burned. But I did not stop. I was organizing the world. If I could make sense of this pile, maybe I could make sense of myself. At 8 o'clock in the evening, the shop was dark, lit only by the green-shaded lamp on Arthur's desk. The ticking of the clocks seemed louder in the silence. "Done," I whispered. Arthur spun around on his stool. He walked over to the counter. The tray was empty. Beside it stood 24 small glass jars, arranged by height, each filled with identical components. He picked up a jar of screws. He shook it. He held it up to the light. He poured a few out into his palm and inspected them with his loop. He looked for a mistake. He found none. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. For the first time, the hardness in his face softened. Just a fraction. "You missed dinner," he said. "I wasn't hungry." I lied. My stomach was twisting into knots. "Liar," Arthur said. "Go upstairs to the attic. There is a bed. There is stew on the stove. Tomorrow, we start real work." That was how I became the apprentice of Sterling horology. Arthur was not a kind man in the traditional sense. He did not ask me how I felt. He did not give me hugs, but he gave me something better. He gave me the truth. "Do not force it," he would yell when I tried to jam a bridge into place. "You are acting like a butcher. You are a surgeon. The machine wants to fit together. You must listen to it." He taught me that a watch is not just a tool to tell time. It is a captured universe. It is energy tamed by geometry. "Listen," he would say, holding a pocket watch from the 19th century to my ear. "Hear that? That is the heartbeat. Tick, tock. It is the escapement releasing energy. It is life." We worked in silence mostly. I spent months doing nothing but cleaning parts. I learned to disassemble a movement, clean the dried oil which looked like black tar from the pivots, using an elder pith, and reassemble it. I learned the names of the parts like a new language. Pallet fork, balance staff, cannon pinion. They were beautiful words. precise and devoid of ambiguity. I discovered that my hands were not just steady, they were intuitive. I could feel the tension in a mainspring before it snapped. I could visualize the three-dimensional interaction of the gears in my head, rotating them mentally to see where the friction was coming from. "You have the sight," Arthur muttered one day, watching me reassemble a chronograph without looking at the diagram. "Your parents were fools, but their loss is the clock's gain." It was the closest thing to a compliment he ever gave. On my 16th birthday, Arthur pointed to a box of scrap parts in the corner, the graveyard of movements that were too broken to fix. "Make something," he said. "Prove you are not just a cleaner." I spent 3 months on that project. I worked late into the night in my attic room, listening to the rain on the roof, the same rain that had washed me out of the Graymont house 3 years ago. I did not want to hide the mechanism. I hated hidden things. My family had hidden their cruelty behind heavy oak doors and polite smiles. I wanted my creation to be honest. I built a skeleton watch. I stripped away the dial. I polished the brass bridges until they shone like gold. I blued the steel screws by heating them over a flame until they turned a deep, royal cornflower color. I exposed the beating heart of the balance wheel so that anyone looking at it could see exactly how it worked. It had no case to protect it, no secrets. It was naked, vulnerable, and functioning perfectly. I presented it to Arthur on a Tuesday morning. He took it in his large, calloused hands. He wound the crown, the gears engaged. The balance wheel began to oscillate with a strong, rhythmic breath. Tick, 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 tick. He watched it for a long time. He checked the amplitude on his timing machine. It was perfect. "What do you call it?" he asked. "The Survivor," I said. Arthur nodded slowly. He did not hand it back to me. Instead, he walked to the front of the shop. He opened the main display case, the one reserved for the Swiss imports and the rare antiques. He moved a Rolex aside and placed my watch on the central velvet pedestal. He placed a small handwritten card next to it, "The Survivor, custom manufacture by E. Gray." "It stays there," he said. "Not for sale. It is the heart of the shop now." I looked at my name on the card. E. Gray, not Graymont, just gray, the color of steel, the color of the dawn before the sun rises. I felt a lump in my throat that I could not swallow, a swelling of pride that was foreign and intoxicating. Life outside the shop moved on, recorded in the newspapers that Arthur bought every morning. Occasionally, the name Graymont would appear in the society or business sections. Richard Graymont files for Chapter 11, Protection on Luxury Condo Project. Catherine Graymont, accused of misappropriating charity gala funds. I saw the headlines. I saw the photos of my mother, looking thinner and more desperate, her smile strained. I saw my father, looking older, his arrogance starting to sag around the jawline. I did not hide the papers. I did not burn them. I took a pair of scissors and cut out the articles with surgical precision. "You keep souvenirs?" Arthur asked, seeing the clippings on my workbench. "No," I said. "I took clippings about my father's bankruptcy. I placed it on the bench. I took a disassembled movement from a carriage clock, dripping with old, dirty oil. I placed the parts onto the face of my father in the photo. The paper absorbed the black sludge, staining his expensive suit, blotting out his eyes with grease. "They are absorbent," I said, wiping my tweezers on my mother's name. "Good for catching the dirt." Arthur watched me, a small, grim smile touching his lips. He understood. We did not fix the past. We disassembled it, cleaned it out, and used what remained to build something that actually worked. And in the quiet of the shop, surrounded by 1,000 ticking clocks, I was finally running on my own time. 8 years is a lifetime for a human, but it is barely a hiccup for the mechanisms I work with. In the horological world, time is measured in centuries, in the slow erosion of brass and the fatigue of steel. For me, those 8 years were a metamorphosis. I buried Arthur Sterling on a Tuesday, the same day of the week my parents had discarded me. It was a small funeral. Just me, the baker from next door, and a few old collectors who respected his hands more than his temper. He left me everything: the shop, the tools, the building, and the reputation. The first thing I did was call a sign painter. I watched from the sidewalk as he scraped away the old gold leaf lettering. When he was finished, the window read, "Sterling Gray." I went to the courthouse the next morning and legally amputated the rest of my name. I cut off the Mont like gangrenous tissue. I was no longer Evelyn Graymont, the abandoned daughter of a failing dynasty. I was Evelyn Gray, gray like industrial steel, gray like the dawn. I did not go to university. I did not need a degree to understand how the world worked. I had the shop. By the time I was 21, I had ceased to be a local curiosity and had become an urban legend in the underground world of high-stakes collecting. The wealthy did not bring their Rolexes to me. They took those to the authorized dealers. They taught me impossible things. The 18th century automata that had not moved since the French Revolution, the singing bird pistols from the Qing dynasty, the perpetual calendars that had lost their minds. They called me the resurrectionist. I charged them exorbitant fees. I looked at their black cards and their desperate faces, and I quoted numbers that would have made my father choke. $50,000 to retooth a fusee wheel, $100,000 to restore a Jacques Drau's writing boy. They paid it without blinking. To them, I was not a person. I was a sorceress who could reverse entropy. With the capital flowing in, I launched my own line. I called it Resurrection. These were not watches to be worn. They were kinetic sculptures. I took the shattered hearts of destroyed vintage movements and built them into floating, glass-encased structures that moved with a hypnotic, terrifying rhythm. I sold the first one for $250,000 to a tech mogul from Silicon Valley. That sale brought Leo Thorne into my shop. Leo was 26, a lawyer who wore his ambition like a tailored suit. He walked into my workspace, looked at the schematics scattered on my drafting table, and whistled. "You are exposed, Evelyn," he said, not bothering with a greeting. "I am working," I replied, not looking up from my microscope. "You have proprietary escapement designs here that are worth millions, and you have them sitting out on a table where any delivery boy could snap a picture," Leo said, leaning against the doorframe. "You need a shark. You need someone to build a wall around your brain." I looked up. Leo had sharp eyes, the kind that read fine print and found loopholes. He did not look at me with pity or lust. He looked at me like I was a high-yield asset. 10%, I said. 15, he countered, and I handle the estate management. 12, I said, and you keep my name out of the press. I stay invisible. He smiled. Deal. With Leo guarding the gates, I transformed the shop. I bought the building from the landlord, paying in cash. I gutted the interior. The dusty, wood-paneled charm of Arthur's era was replaced by a fortress of solitude. I installed climate control systems that kept the humidity at a constant 45%. I built a clean room with positive pressure ventilation. I installed biometric locks that only responded to my retina and my fingerprints. The exterior remained a humble, narrow shopfront in a forgotten part of the city. Inside, it was a spaceship. It was my kingdom. While I ascended, I watched the House of Graymont crumble. I did not have to seek out the news. Leo included a risk assessment folder in our monthly meetings, which was just a polite way of letting me keep tabs on my biological donors without admitting I cared. The reports were grim. Julian, the golden boy, the investment, had blown out his knee in his sophomore year of college. The reconstructive surgeries failed. The scouts stopped calling. He was now 23, working a mid-level sales job at a dealership, drinking too much, and trading on a last name that was rapidly losing its currency. And Bella, my beautiful sister, the commercial face. She had chased the limelight so hard she burned out her retinas. She was an influencer with a declining engagement rate, living a lifestyle she could not afford to project an image of success that did not exist. Leo showed me her credit report once. It was a sea of red ink. She was drowning in debt, financing designer bags on high-interest credit cards. My parents were worse. Richard's real estate developments were mired in lawsuits. Catherine was aging, and for a woman whose entire value was predicated on her appearance, time was a cruel executioner. They were bleeding cash, desperately trying to maintain the facade of the Blackwood Heights elite while the foundation rotted beneath them. They were slaves to time. I was its master. Then came the letter. It arrived via private courier, sealed with wax. It was from the Heritage Foundation, the city's most secretive and prestigious historical society. They wanted to commission me for the restoration of the Celestial Heart. I stopped breathing for a moment when I read the name. The Celestial Heart was a myth made of metal. It was a massive, astronomical clock built in the late 19th century that had stood in the center of the city's Grand Museum. It tracked the stars, the tides, the phases of the moon, and the precession of the equinoxes. It had been silent for 50 years. No one could fix it. The best watchmakers from Switzerland had tried and failed. The letter was brief. We have heard rumors of your capability. Name your price. If you succeed, you will be the guest of honor at the unveiling gala. I sat in my high-tech fortress, the letter trembling slightly in my hand. This was it. This was not just a job. This was a stage. If I fixed the Celestial Heart, I could not remain invisible. I would be thrust into the spotlight. And my parents. They would be at that gala. They never missed a high society event, especially one where they could hunt for new investors. I picked up the phone and dialed Leo. Accept the contract, I said. The Celestial Heart. Leo's voice cracked with excitement. Evelyn, that is a career maker, but the press, you know you will have to step out of the shadows. I looked at the resurrection sculpture on my desk, its gears spinning in a silent, deadly dance. I know, I said. It is time. I was not just going to fix a clock. I was going to set a trap. The Celestial Heart would be the centerpiece of my vengeance. I would invite them to watch me restart time, and in doing so, I would show them exactly how much of it they had wasted. Draft the contract, Leo, I said, my voice steady as the beat of a pendulum. And make sure the fee is astronomical. The magazine sat on my desk, glossy and smelling of fresh ink. It was the latest issue of Forbes, opened to page 42. The headline screamed in bold, Sans serif typography. The Time Witch. How Evelyn Gray is reinventing the lost art of horology. The photo they had chosen was stark. It was a black and white close-up of my hands, working on the escapement of a 17th century breguet. My face was in partial shadow, a deliberate choice Leo and I had made. We wanted to sell the mystery, the idea of a recluse genius operating from a fortress, but the caption gave away the one thing I had kept buried for 8 years. Evelyn Gray, formerly of the Graymont estate, has built an empire from the ashes of antiquity. Leo had warned me. He said that fame was a flare sent up in a dark forest. It would illuminate my path, but it would also show the wolves exactly where to find me. He was right. The phone began to ring 3 hours after the digital edition went live. I did not recognize the number at first, but the area code was a ghost from my past Blackwood Heights. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to the message in the silence of my clean room. Hey, Evie, the voice said. It was breezy, casual, and forced. It was Julian. It's your big brother. God, I saw the article. You look... wow. Listen, Mom and Dad talk about you all the time. We should catch up. Grab a coffee. We are family. Right? Call me back. The hypocrisy was so thick I could almost taste it. Like sour milk. Mom and Dad talk about you all the time. The only time they had spoken about me in the last decade was probably to thank their lawyers that they didn't have to pay for my dental work. I deleted the message. I blocked the number. I went back to polishing a ruby bearing for the Celestial Heart. I thought that was the end of it. I thought I could block them out like I blocked a spam caller. I was wrong. The next afternoon, the chime above the heavy security door of Sterling Gray rang. I looked up from my workbench. My showroom was appointment only, and my schedule was empty for the day. I checked the security feed on my monitor. A woman was standing outside the bulletproof glass doors. She was wearing a cream-colored Chanel suit and oversized sunglasses. She was pressing the intercom button repeatedly, her posture rigid with an entitlement that defied her circumstances. It was Catherine, my mother. I felt a cold sensation wash over me. Not fear, but a sudden drop in temperature, like opening a freezer door. I could have left her there. I could have called security. But curiosity is a mechanic's fatal flaw. I wanted to see how this machine operated after all these years. I wanted to see the rust. I buzzed her in. Catherine walked into the showroom, her heels clicking on the polished concrete floor. She took off her sunglasses. The years had not been kind to her. Her face was pulled tight from too many lifts, giving her a permanent look of surprise, but the skin around her neck was loose. Her eyes, once sharp and predatory, looked watery and anxious. She looked around the room, taking in the floating kinetic sculptures, the museum-quality lighting, the smell of expensive success. Then, her eyes landed on me. "Evelyn," she breathed. She dropped her bag on a velvet ottoman and rushed toward me, arms open. "Oh, my baby girl, look at you." She smelled of expensive perfume and stale gin. I did not move. I did not stand up. I sat on my stool behind the high counter, my hands folded on top of the glass. When she got close enough to touch me, I simply looked at her. The look was enough to make her stop. She froze, her arms hovering awkwardly in the air, before she dropped them to her sides. "Evelyn," she tried again, her voice trembling with a performance of maternal grief. "We have been looking for you, for years. When the lawyers told us you had run away from the foster home, we were frantic. The system. There was a clerical error. They lost your file. We didn't know where you were." It was a lie so bold, so easily disprovable, that it was almost impressive. "Mrs. Vance sent you updates every month for the first 2 years," I said. My voice was calm, devoid of inflection. "You returned the letters unopened, marked Return to Sender. I have them in a box upstairs." Catherine flinched. The grieving mother mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing the panic underneath. She quickly recovered, dabbing at her dry eyes with a handkerchief. "There must have been a misunderstanding," she insisted. "Your father, he was going through so much stress. But that doesn't matter now. You are here. You are successful. We are so proud of you. Evelyn, we want you back in the family." She reached out to touch my hand on the counter. I pulled it back. "You have 5 minutes," I said. "Excuse me?" "My consultation rate for non-clients is $500 a minute," I said, glancing at the Patek Philippe on my wrist. "You have been here for 90 seconds. You are already in debt to me. State your business." "Catherine." She stared at me, her mouth slightly open. She was expecting the scared 13-year-old girl who hid in the shadows. She was not prepared to be the CEO of Sterling Gray. She licked her lips. Her eyes darted around the room again, assessing the value of the inventory. I saw her gaze linger on the resurrection sculpture in the corner, the one priced at $300,000. "We are in a bit of a bind, Evelyn," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Cash flow issues, just temporary. The market is volatile. You know how it is." "I do," I said. "My market is doing exceptionally well." She forced a tight smile. "That is wonderful, really. And since you are doing so well, we thought, well, Julian is trying to start a new venture, and your father needs to restructure some liquidity." She reached into her handbag, which I noticed now was an old season Prada, scuffed at the corners and fraying at the strap, and pulled out a folded document. "It is just a formality," she said, sliding the paper across the glass. "A co-signature. For a bridge loan, the bank just wants to see a guarantor with liquid assets. You wouldn't even have to pay anything. It is just your name, Evelyn, the Graymont name." I looked down at the paper. It was a loan application for $2 million. "You want me to underwrite a loan for the people who threw me away like a broken toaster?" I asked. "We didn't throw you away," she cried, her voice rising in pitch. "We did what we had to do. We were protecting the family assets. And now, You are part of that family again. You owe us. Evelyn, we gave you life. We gave you your talent. My talent. I laughed. It was a dry, sharp sound. Arthur Sterling gave me my talent. The state of New York gave me a bed. You gave me nothing but a complex about abandonment. I picked up the loan application. I held it between my thumb and forefinger as if it were contaminated. No, I said. Evelyn, please, she begged, her dignity vanishing. They are going to take the house. The Hamptons estate is already gone. If we don't get this loan, we lose everything. We will be on the street. There are shelters, I said, echoing the words my father had used 15 years ago. The system is there for a reason. Catherine's face changed. The pathetic, pleading look vanished, replaced by the ugly, snarling expression I remembered from my childhood. She slammed her hand down on the glass counter. You ungrateful little wretch, she hissed. You think you are better than us? You are nothing without us. If you don't sign this paper, I will go to the press. I will tell them everything. I will tell them you are a cold-hearted monster who leaves her elderly parents to rot while she sits in her ivory tower. I will ruin your reputation. Who will buy your precious clocks when they know what kind of person you really are? She stood up straight, smoothing her suit, thinking she had played an ace. She thought she could shame me. She thought she could use the public's perception against me. I stood up too. I walked around the counter until I was standing right in front of her. I was taller than her now. Go ahead, I said softly. She blinked. What? Go to the press, I said. Call TMZ. Call the Times. Tell them whatever you want. I leaned in close, so she could see the absolute lack of fear in my eyes. But remember one thing. Mother, I am a horologist. Do you know what I do all day? I take things apart. I examine every gear, every spring, every lever. I find the friction. I find the rot. And I fix it by removing the bad parts. I pointed to the door. If you declare war on me, I will not just defend myself. I will disassemble you. I have the receipts. Catherine, I have the records of the trust funds you drained from Julian and Bella. I have the timeline of your fraud. You think you can manipulate the narrative. I control the mechanism of the truth. Catherine stepped back, her face draining of color. She looked at me with genuine horror. She realized, finally, that the daughter she had discarded was gone. In her place was a machine that could not be bullied, bribed, or gaslit. You are cold, she whispered. You have no heart. I have a heart, I said, opening the door for her. It just keeps perfect time, and right now, your time is up. I ushered her out into the street. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, clutching her frayed bag, looking small and defeated against the gray backdrop of the city. Then she turned and hurried away, disappearing into the crowd. I locked the door. I turned the sign to closed. I went back to my workbench. My hands were shaking, just slightly. I picked up my tweezers, took a deep breath, and steadied them. The vultures had circled. They had tested the perimeter. Now they knew the walls were electrified. But I knew this wasn't over. Desperate people do desperate things, and the Greymonts were running out of time. My father, Richard Greymont, was not a man who believed in emotional appeals. He believed in leverage. If my mother was a blunt instrument trying to batter down my door with guilt. My father was a sniper. He did not come to my showroom. He did not call. He sent a delegation. 3 days after I had evicted Catherine from my premises, a black town car pulled up to the curb. 2 men stepped out. One was a stranger, a man in a charcoal suit with a briefcase that looked like it cost more than most people's cars. The other was Julian. My brother walked into sterling gray with a swagger that felt rehearsed. He was 23 now, and he still looked like the varsity athlete he had been in high school. Broad shoulders, square jaw, the kind of golden boy looks that open doors. But up close, under the unforgiving LED lights of my workshop, I saw the cracks. There were dark circles under his eyes that the concealer couldn't quite hide, and his hands, usually so sure when gripping a football, were fidgeting with his cufflinks. I did not invite them into the private workshop. I kept them in the main gallery, standing next to a kinetic sculpture of a bird taking flight, a piece I had titled The Escape. "Evelyn," Julian said, flashing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You look incredible. Seriously. Professional." "Julian," I acknowledged him with a nod. I turned my gaze to the suit. "This is Mr. Ms. Gray's legal counsel. Leo Thorne," I said as Leo stepped out from the back office. Leo was wearing jeans and a blazer, a deliberate contrast to the stiff corporate armor of our guests. "And this," Julian gestured to the man beside him, "is Marcus Vane, chief counsel for the Graymont Group." "The Graymont Group?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Last I checked, it was just Dad and a pile of foreclosed condos." Mr. Vane cleared his throat. He opened his briefcase and laid a thick document on the glass table. "The Graymont Group is a newly incorporated holding entity. Your father has pivoted, Ms. Gray. He is moving away from physical real estate and into intellectual property and luxury branding. He sees the synergy between your hobby and the family legacy." "It is not a hobby," Leo said, his voice sharp. "It is a multi-million-dollar enterprise." "Exactly," Julian chimed in, stepping forward. He tried to lean on the table, to bridge the physical gap between us. "Evie, listen, Dad knows he messed up. He knew things were harsh, but he wants to make it right. He wants to bring you into the fold. This isn't a handout. It is a partnership." I looked at the document. The title page read, "Strategic Merger Agreement, Graymont Group, Sterling Gray." "A merger," I said flatly. "Think about it," Julian said, his voice dropping to a persuasive purr. "We have the connections, the old money network. You have the product. If we combine, we could be the biggest luxury house in New York. We would be unstoppable. Graymont daughter, or just Graymont," Mr. Vane corrected smoothly, "for branding consistency." I looked at Leo. He was already flipping through the contract, his eyes scanning the dense legal text with the speed of a machine. He stopped on page 12. He read it, then read it again. He let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Clause 14, Section B," Leo said, looking up at Mr. Vane. "Voting rights." Mr. Vane stiffened. "Standard boilerplate." "Boilerplate?" Leo scoffed. "It states that in the event of a creative dispute, the board of directors retains final veto power. And who sits on the board? Richard Graymont, Catherine Graymont, and Julian Graymont." I looked at Julian. He shifted his weight, looking away. "And here," Leo continued, pointing to another paragraph, "intellectual property transfer. Upon execution of this agreement, all past, present, and future patents held by Evelyn Gray become the sole property of the parent company, Graymont Group, in exchange for Class B, non-voting stock." Leo slammed the folder shut. "This isn't a merger, Julian. This is a harvest. You want to strip her assets, take her patents to pump up the valuation of your shell company, and leave her with worthless stock in a sinking ship. You want to own her brain." The silence that followed was electric. Mr. Vane began to pack up his papers, realizing the ambush had failed. But Julian didn't move. He looked desperate. "Leo, give us a minute," I said. "Evelyn, I advise against—" "It is fine. Leo, wait in the office." Leo hesitated, then nodded and retreated, leaving me alone with my brother and his lawyer. I gestured for Mr. Vane to leave as well. He looked at Julian, shrugged, and walked out to the street. "Evie," Julian started. "Leo is paranoid. That is just legal talk. Dad just wants to protect you. He wants to secure the family's future." "The family future," I repeated. "You mean your future?" I walked around the table and stood in front of him. We were the same height now in my heels. "Julian, do you remember the night I left?" I asked. He blinked, taken aback by the sudden shift. "What?" "That was 15 years ago. We were kids." "I was 13, I said. "You were 15. You were old enough to understand English. You were old enough to understand math." "I don't know what you mean." "You were standing at the top of the stairs," I said. I saw your shadow. You were listening, just like I was. You heard Dad say he was keeping you because you were an asset. You heard him say, I was an expense. Julian's face flushed a deep, ugly red. I was scared. Evie, I didn't know what to do. You knew exactly what to do, I said, my voice cold and precise. You did the math. You realized that if I stayed, the resources would be split 3 ways. If I left, there was more for you, more coaching, more cars, more attention. That is not fair, Julian shouted, his composure cracking. I was a child. You were a beneficiary, I countered. And you are still trying to be one. You didn't come here today to make peace. You came here because Dad's money ran out, and you realized the expense you all threw away is now the only one with any value. I looked him up and down, dissecting him. You are not a bad person, Julian. You are just weak. And in my line of work, a weak gear is worse than a broken one. A broken one stops the machine. A weak one causes it to tear itself apart from the inside. So that is it, Julian sneered, the mask of the loving brother falling away completely. You are just going to let us drown. Are you going solely for revenge? I am not seeking revenge, I said, walking to the door and holding it open. I am seeking efficiency, and carrying dead weight is inefficient. I looked him in the eye. Go back to Richard. Tell him I read the contract. Tell him that he sold me once for the price of a clear ledger. He does not get to buy me back now that I have appreciated in value. Julian stormed out, brushing past me. He stopped on the sidewalk, turning back with a look of pure venom. You think you are untouchable because of your patents and your fancy clocks, he spat. But you forget, Evelyn, Dad writes the history in this town. You are just a mechanic. He got into the car, and they drove away. I thought the rejection would end it. I thought they would retreat to lick their wounds. But I had underestimated Richard Graymont's capacity for destruction. If he could not own the asset, he would destroy its market value. The rumors started 48 hours later. It began with a blind item in a gossip column, then a tip sent to the Heritage Foundation board. The whisper campaign was subtle but devastating. Is the Time Witch a fraud? Sources close to the Graymont family allege that the breakthrough designs used in the Resurrection series were actually stolen from the private journals of the late Archibald Graymont. Evelyn's grandfather, it was a lie. My grandfather had been a real estate tycoon, not a horologist. He couldn't tell a mainspring from a mattress spring, but the public didn't know that. They just heard stolen legacy. Then came the call from the Heritage Foundation. Ms. Gray, the chairman's voice was strained. We have received some concerning allegations regarding the provenance of your techniques. Given the historical significance of the celestial heart, we need to pause the project pending an independent review. I stood in my workshop, the phone pressed to my ear. The celestial heart sat on the heavy workbench in front of me, partially disassembled. It was a masterpiece of brass and iron, and I was the only one who could make it breathe again. But Richard was trying to cut off my hands. He was trying to freeze me out of the one job that would cement my legacy. I looked at the phone. Don't pause anything, I said to the chairman. I will prove the designs are mine, and I will prove who the real thief is. I hung up. I looked at Leo, who was already typing furiously on his laptop, drafting cease and desist letters. He wants a war, I said quietly. He thinks he can use the past to bury me. I picked up a screwdriver, testing the weight of it in my hand. He forgot that I built my entire life on the wreckage of the past. If he wants to dig up ghosts, I will show him exactly what happens when you disturb a grave. The rumors were like rust. If you did not catch them early, they would eat through the strongest steel, compromising structural integrity until the whole machine collapsed under its own weight. My father knew this. He was banking on it. He wanted the Heritage Foundation to lose faith in me so he could swoop in as the concerned patriarch to manage my affairs. He had made a critical miscalculation. He treated me like a public relations problem to be spun. But it was not a PR problem. I was an engineer, And when an engineer hears a grinding noise in the engine, she does not turn up the radio to drown it out. She tears the engine apart to find the foreign object. "Stop issuing denials. Leo," I said. We were in my office, the city lights of New York blurring through the rain-streaked glass. Denials look like guilt. "We are not going to defend my reputation. We are going to dismantle theirs." I authorized Leo to hire a forensic accountant and a private investigator, a man named Silas, who used to recover stolen watches for the insurance companies. I gave them a blank check and a single directive: find the money, or rather, find where the money went. 48 hours later, the report was on my desk. It was not just a smoking gun, it was a crime scene. I sat in the silence of my clean room, flipping through the pages of bank statements, shell company transfers, and trust fund ledgers. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. I had always assumed my parents kept Julian and Bella because they loved them. I thought they were prized possessions. I was wrong. They weren't pets. They were livestock. The Graymont Family Trust, established by my grandfather for the education and future of his grandchildren, was empty. It contained $5 million. It should have vested when we turned 25. Richard and Catherine had drained it. They had set up a dummy corporation listed as an investment advisor and billed the trust for exorbitant management fees every month for 10 years. They had eaten their children's future to pay for country club memberships, lease payments on Bentleys, and Catherine's plastic surgery. But the file on Bella was even worse. I picked up my phone. I dialed the number Leo had dug up for my sister. "Hello?" Her voice was brittle, high-pitched, and defensive. "Meet me at the corner of 5th and Mercer," I said. "The coffee shop with the blue awning. 20 minutes. Evelyn, I can't just—" "If you don't come," I cut her off. "I will release the file I have on your credit card debt to the tabloids. You have $80,000 in unpaid bills. Bella, how will that look for your lifestyle brand?" She hung up. But I knew she would be there. I arrived first. I sat in the back, away from the window. When Bella walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. On Instagram, she was a glowing goddess of wellness and luxury. In the harsh fluorescent light of a coffee shop, she looked gray. Her designer coat was missing a button. Her hair was dry from overstyling. She looked exhausted, terrified, and incredibly young. She sat down, refusing to make eye contact. "What do you want? Dad said I shouldn't talk to you. He said you are toxic." "Dad says a lot of things," I said. I slid a black folder across the table. "Open it." She hesitated, her manicured hand hovering over the leather cover. Is this money? Because if you are trying to buy me off..." "Open it, Bella." She flipped it open. Her eyes scanned the columns of numbers. She frowned. "I don't understand. What is this?" "That is the ledger for your trust fund," I explained, keeping my voice low and steady. "Grandfather left each of us $1.5 million. It was supposed to be yours next year." "I know," she said defensively. "Dad is managing it. He says the market is down right now, so we have to be patient. Look at the balance, Bella." She looked. She blinked. She looked again. "Zero," she whispered. "Negative. Actually," I corrected. "They overdrew the account 6 months ago to pay for the settlement on Dad's failed marina project. It is gone. All of it. Julian's too." Bella shook her head, a nervous laugh escaping her lips. "No, that is impossible. Dad said. He said it was invested in bonds." "He lied," I said. "But that is not the worst part. Turn the page." She turned the page. It was an email chain Leo had subpoenaed from my father's server. It was a conversation between Richard and a man named Mr. Henderson, a 60-year-old venture capitalist known for his predatory lending and his taste for young trophies. Subject collateral. "Richard, the merger is crucial. I can guarantee Bella's cooperation. She is young, malleable, and she needs stability. A union between our families would secure the loan. Henderson. If she agrees to the engagement by Christmas, I will release the funds." Bella read the email. Her face went pale, the color draining away so fast I thought she might faint. She read it 3 times. "He is selling me," she choked out. Tears began to well up in her eyes, ruining her mascara. "He told me Mr. Henderson was just a mentor. He told me I should be nice to him because he could help my career." "He is not a mentor," I said. "He is a buyer, and you are the asset being liquidated to cover the bad debt." Bella put her head in her hands. Her shoulders shook. The image of the spoiled, golden child dissolved, leaving only a broken girl who realized she had been raised for slaughter. "I thought they loved me," she sobbed. "They kept me. They sent you away. I thought it was because I was special." "They kept you because you were useful," I said. It was harsh, but kindness would not save her now. "I was the lucky one, Bella. I was scrap metal. They threw me out, so I got to rust in peace. You and Julian. You were the copper wiring in the walls. They stripped you bare to keep the lights on for 1 more month." I let that sink in. I watched the reality shatter her world. I waited until the crying stopped and the anger began to set in. "What do I do?" she asked, looking up at me. Her eyes were red, but the vacuous look was gone. There was a spark of something real there. "You have a choice," I said. "You can go back to that house, put on a pretty dress, and marry the man who bought your father's debt. You can continue to be an accessory," I leaned forward. "Or you can become a wrench in the gears." "How?" she asked. "I am going to sue them," I said. "Not for money, they don't have any. I am suing for fraud. I am going to expose the theft of the trust funds. I am going to expose the fake charity gala. I am going to burn their reputation to the ground so that no bank in this city will ever lend Richard Graymont a single dime again." "But they are my parents," she whispered, the old conditioning still fighting back. "They are parasites," I said. "And they have fed on you long enough. I need a witness. Bella, I need someone who lived inside the house to testify that the lifestyle was funded by stolen money. If you stand with me, I will help you. I won't give you money you have to earn your own way, like I did, but I will give you a job, I will give you a lawyer, and I will help you get your name back." Bella looked down at the email again. She looked at the 0 balance on the trust fund. She took a deep breath, and for the first time, I saw a resemblance to myself, not in the face, but in the jaw. The set of the jaw that says, "Enough." "He called me malleable," she murmured. She looked up at me. "I am not malleable." "Then prove it," I said. I stood up and dropped a $20 bill on the table for the coffee. "My lawyer is drafting the affidavit. Be at my office at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. If you are not there, I assume you have chosen the wedding dress." I walked out of the coffee shop without looking back. I went straight to Leo's office. "Initiate the firewall," I ordered. "You are sure?" Leo asked. "It is irreversible. Once we move the assets into the blind trust, even you can't touch the principal for 5 years. It completely isolates your wealth from any familial claim, lawsuits, or inheritance disputes." "Do it," I said. "Lock it down. Every patent, every property, every cent of the resurrection line. Put it all behind a wall of titanium. If Richard Graymont tries to sue me for filial support, or claims he has a stake in my business because he bought me diapers 20 years ago, I want him to hit a barrier so hard it breaks his hand." Leo typed the command. "Executed. Your assets are now legally distinct entities. You are an island. Evelyn." "Good," I said, staring out at the skyline. I had neutralized the threat to my business. I had armed the torpedo that would sink their social standing, and I had potentially turned their own assets against them. The investigation wasn't just a shield. It was a scalpel, and I was ready to perform surgery. The invitation was printed on heavy cream cardstock with gold embossed lettering. It read, "The Graymont Family Gala for the Children, honoring the bond of family and the spirit of giving." It was a masterclass in irony. My parents, who had discarded their own child like a defective prototype, were hosting a black tie event to raise money for orphans. But I knew the schematics of this particular machine. The charity was a shell. The administrative costs would absorb 80% of the donations, funneling the money straight into my father's offshore accounts to pay off the sharks circling his real estate empire. They invited me not because they wanted me there, but because they needed a headline. They needed the Time Witch, the resurrectionist, to stand next to them and validate their fraudulent narrative of a happy reunited clan. I did not decline. I accepted. I arrived at the Pierre Hotel at 8 o'clock. The dress code was black tie, which usually meant a sea of tuxedos and conservative black gowns. I chose not to blend in. I wore a dress of silk chiffon in a shade of red so deep it looked like oxygenated blood. It was a violent color, a warning flare amidst the monochrome crowd. On my wrist, I wore no diamonds, no platinum bracelets. I wore the Survivor. The skeleton watch with its exposed gears and blued steel screws ticked against my pulse, a reminder of the mechanism that had kept me alive when they left me to rust. As I stepped onto the red carpet, the flashbulbs went off like a strobe light. Evelyn over here. Ms. Gray, is it true you are rejoining the family business? I walked past the reporters with the cool detachment of a queen passing through a plague ward. I did not smile. I did not wave. I simply moved with kinetic efficiency toward the ballroom. Inside, the air smelled of lilies and expensive champagne. My mother, Catherine, spotted me instantly. She was wearing a silver gown that was too tight, her face plastered with a smile that looked painful. She rushed over, hooking her arm through mine with a grip that felt like a claw. "Evelyn," she trilled, loud enough for the nearby donors to hear. "Oh, Richard, look, our girl is here." My father materialized from the crowd. He looked impeccable in his tuxedo, the picture of the benevolent patriarch. Only I could see the sweat beading on his upper lip and the dilated pupils of a man under extreme pressure. "You came," he said, his voice low. "I received an invitation," I replied. It seemed rude to refuse. "Good," Richard whispered, leaning in close as a photographer snapped our picture. "Play along, Evelyn, just for tonight. We need this night to go perfectly. The investors are watching." "I am sure they are," I said. They paraded me through the room like a prize poodle. They introduced me to bankers, senators, and socialites, always with the same sickening script. "We are so proud of her success, and she gets her artistic eye from her mother." I let them talk. I let them spin their web. I waited for the mainspring to wind tight. At 9 o'clock, the lights dimmed. My father walked onto the stage to a polite ripple of applause. He stood behind the podium, gripping the sides as if to keep the room from spinning. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice booming with practiced charisma, "tonight is about legacy. It is about the future. The Graymont family has always believed in nurturing the next generation, and tonight, I am overcome with emotion to announce that our family is whole again." He gestured toward me. A spotlight swung through the darkness and pinned me to my chair. "My daughter, Evelyn Gray, the genius behind Sterling and Gray, has returned to us," Richard announced. "And to mark this joyous reunion, Evelyn has generously pledged to kickstart our fundraising tonight with a donation of $5 million. The room gasped. Then, thunderous applause. My mother clapped her hands to her mouth in feigned surprise. Though her eyes were hard and calculating, they had sprung the trap. They had announced a number so large, so public, that I would be shamed into writing the check. If I refused now, I would look like a monster. They thought they had checkmated me. I stood up. The applause grew louder. I walked toward the stage. My father was beaming. He stepped back from the microphone, extending a hand to welcome me, expecting me to take my place beside him as the dutiful, bankrolling daughter. I walked past his hand. I walked past him entirely. I took the podium. I adjusted the microphone. I looked out at the sea of faces, 500 of the city's wealthiest people, all waiting for the heartwarming speech. $5 million, I said. My voice was calm, amplified clearly through the ballroom. It is a significant number. It is the exact amount required to service the debt on a failed marina project in the Hamptons, or so I have been told. The applause died instantly. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. My father's smile froze. "I am a watchmaker," I continued. "In my line of work, precision is everything. If a single gear is out of alignment, the entire mechanism fails. We have a term for parts that look functional on the outside, but are corroded on the inside. We call it rot." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small remote. I clicked it. The massive screen behind me, which had been displaying the Graymont family crest, flickered. The image changed. It was not a photo of happy orphans. It was a video from my workbench, high definition, macro footage of a rusted, seizing movement. The sound of grinding metal filled the ballroom screech. Crack, snap. When a movement is rusted, I narrated over the video. You cannot simply oil it. You cannot paint over it. The rust is contagious. It spreads. It eats clean steel. If you want the machine to run, you have to do the hard work. On the screen, my hands appeared. Wielding a screwdriver, I began to disassemble the machine. I removed a rusted cog and threw it into a trash bin. "You have to remove the rot," I said. I turned to look at my parents. They were standing in the wings. Catherine looked like she was about to scream. Richard looked like he was having a stroke. "My parents announced a donation in my name," I said, turning back to the audience. "And I intend to honor the spirit of giving, but a watchmaker knows that you must apply the oil to the pivot, not pour it on the floor." I clicked the remote again. The screen changed to a logo, the Arthur Sterling Foundation for Foster Care. "I am officially establishing the Arthur Sterling Foundation," I declared. "Named after the man who actually taught me the value of time and labor, the $5 million will not be going to the Graymont family gala." I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was tight enough to snap. "It will be deposited directly into a blind trust to fund vocational training for children aging out of the foster system. It will be administered by an independent board. Not 1 cent will pass through the hands of Richard or Catherine Graymont. Not 1 cent will be used to pay off gambling debts, failed real estate loans, or to maintain a facade of wealth that no longer exists." The room erupted, not with applause, but with the chaotic noise of shock. People stood up. Whispers turned into shouts. "Stop her!" Catherine shrieked. She abandoned all pretense of elegance. She lunged from the side of the stage, her silver dress flashing under the lights. "Cut the mic. Cut the sound." A security guard, one of my own, whom Leo had positioned near the stage, stepped in her path. She bounced off him, flailing impotently. "You ungrateful brat!" she screamed, her voice shrill and ugly without the amplification. "We made you. This is our money." "It was never your money," I said into the mic, my voice cutting through her hysteria. "And now, everyone knows it." I looked at my father. He was still standing in the shadows of the curtain. His face was a mask of pure, impotent rage. His fists were clenched at his sides. He looked at me with a hatred so pure it could have melted lead. I looked back at him. I raised my wrist and tapped the crystal of the survivor. Tick, tock. "Your time is up, Richard," I said. Though only the front row heard it, I placed the microphone back on the stand. It made a sharp feedback whine. A period at the end of a sentence. I walked down the stairs. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. They stared at me with a mixture of horror and awe. I saw the investors checking their phones, likely calling their lawyers to pull their funding from the Graymont Group. I saw the society matrons looking at Catherine, who was now sobbing on the stage, with open disdain. I didn't run. I didn't rush. I walked with the steady, measured pace of a pendulum. I walked through the heavy double doors, past the flashing cameras, and out into the cool night air. The gala was over. The machine had been disassembled. The bad parts had been exposed to the light. And now, the cleaning could finally begin. Desperation is a corrosive force. It eats away at logic, dissolves caution, and leaves only the raw, jagged edges of survival instinct. After the gala, the Graymont facade did not just crack, it shattered. My public rejection had spooked the herd. The creditors, who had been held at bay by Richard's empty promises of a family reunion and access to my capital. descended upon them with the speed of starving wolves. Within 48 hours, the liens were filed. The foreclosure notices were taped to the front gate of the Blackwood Heights estate. My father was a drowning man, and like all drowning men, he reached for the only buoyant object within reach, my name. I knew he would do it. I had calculated the probability of his fraud just as I calculated the wear on a gear train. I knew that Richard Graymont would not go down quietly. He would try to sell what he did not own. I had prepared for this moment weeks ago. During the meeting with Julian and their lawyer, I had intentionally left a file on the table when I stepped out, a draft of intellectual property transfer. It looked like a standard legal concession, a capitulation. It was bait. The document contained what forensic experts call a canary trap. The paper was watermarked with a microscopic pattern invisible to the naked eye, and the signature line contained a specific, unique variance in the kerning of the font. If that specific document ever appeared in a filing office or a bank, I would know exactly where it came from and who had authorized it. On Friday morning, 3 days after the gala, the trap snapped shut. I was in my workshop when Leo burst in. His phone pressed to his ear. He didn't knock. He didn't need to. "They are doing it," Leo said, his voice tight with adrenaline. My contact at the registrar's office just flagged a transfer request. Richard is attempting to sell the exclusive rights to the Resurrection trademark and the Sterling and Gray name to a private equity firm in Zurich. The sale price is $10 million. "Is the signature on the document?" I asked, putting down my loop. "It is." Leo nodded grimly. "And it is a perfect match for the one on the draft you left with Julian." He traced it. "Call the Economic Crimes Unit," I said, standing up and wiping my hands on a rag. "It is time to close the account." We arrived at the Graymont Group offices 40 minutes later. It was a sterile glass tower in the financial district, a monument to money that no longer existed. We did not go alone. We were flanked by 4 detectives from the fraud division and a forensic document examiner. The receptionist tried to stop us, stuttering something about a private meeting, but the lead detective, a man named Sergeant Miller, simply held up his badge and kept walking. We pushed open the double doors to the conference room. The scene inside was almost theatrical. My father was sitting at the head of the long mahogany table. My mother was beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder, looking anxious but triumphant. Across from them sat 2 Swiss bankers, reviewing a stack of documents. Julian was standing by the window, looking out at the city, refusing to watch the crime being committed. My father looked up as the doors swung open. For a split second, I saw relief in his eyes. Perhaps he thought I had come to stop the madness by finally writing a check. Then he saw the police. "What is the meaning of this?" Richard demanded, standing up. "This is a private business transaction." "It is a crime scene," Leo announced, stepping forward. "Richard Graymont, you are attempting to sell assets that do not belong to you using a forged instrument." "That is a lie," Catherine shrieked, jumping up. "Evelyn signed those papers. She agreed to the sale. She wants to help the family." "I signed nothing," I said. Walking into the room, the Swiss bankers looked from me to my father, then rapidly began closing their folders. They smelled the toxicity in the air. "This is my daughter's signature." Richard slammed his hand on the document. "She gave this to us weeks ago. She is just having second thoughts because of the publicity." "That document," I said, my voice calm and carrying across the room, "is a forgery based on a draft I planted, and I can prove it." I looked toward the door. "Bella." My sister stepped into the room. She was not wearing her usual designer armor. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater. She looked pale, but her eyes were dry. She walked past me and stood next to the police sergeant. "Bella," my mother whispered, "what are you doing?" "Tell them," I said. Bella took a breath. She looked at our parents, the people who had raised her to be a doll, an asset, a piece of collateral. "I saw them do it," Bella said. Her voice shook, but the words were clear. "Last night, in the study, Dad used a lightbox to trace Evelyn's signature from the old contract onto the new transfer deed. Mom practiced the loops on a notepad for an hour to make sure it looked authentic. They told me. They told me it was the only way to save the house. They forced me to witness the signature. You lying little traitor. Richard lunged across the table. The detectives moved instantly. Two of them grabbed Richard, pinning his arms behind his back. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut was loud and mechanical. Click, click, click. It sounded like a gear slipping a tooth. Bella, how could you? Catherine wailed as a female officer took her arm. After everything we did for you. You didn't do anything for me, Bella said, tears finally spilling over. You spent my future. You sold my trust fund, and you tried to sell me to a loan shark. I am done. Richard was red-faced, spitting venom as they dragged him toward the door. This is a mistake. My daughter is confused, Evelyn. Tell them this is a misunderstanding. I walked over to where he stood. Restrained by the police, I looked him in the eye. The ink on that document contains a chemical tag, I said softly, so only he could hear. Barium sulfate. I put it there myself. It is a trap. Father. And you walked right into it. He stopped struggling. The realization hit him. He hadn't been outsmarted by a lawyer or a cop. He had been outsmarted by the mechanic he thought was too stupid to understand business. You are cold, he spat. You are ice. I am just accurate, I replied. They led them away. The Swiss bankers fled the room as if the building were on fire. Leo stayed behind to secure the evidence. I walked out into the hallway. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Julian. He was still standing by the window in the conference room, 10 feet away from me. But he was calling me. He couldn't even face me. I answered. Evie, he sobbed into the phone. Evie, please. I didn't know. I swear to God. I didn't know they forged it. I thought you changed your mind. I looked through the glass wall of the conference room. I saw him hunching over, holding the phone like a lifeline. You knew, Julian, I said. I didn't. I was just in the room. I didn't sign anything. You stood by the window, I said. You looked away. Just like you looked away when I was 13. Just like you looked away when they spent your trust fund. Just like you looked away when they tried to sell Bella. I am your brother, he pleaded. They are going to arrest me too as an accomplice. Please, tell them I wasn't involved. You have the power. You can stop this. Sovereign immunity does not apply to cowardice, I said. Ignorance is not a shield. Julian, it is a choice. You chose not to look because it was profitable for you not to see. Evelyn, please, I will do anything. I will work for you. I don't need you, I said. I have Bella. She spoke up. You stayed silent. I hung up the phone. I watched through the glass as the detective approached Julian. I watched him drop the phone. I watched the realization wash over him that the golden boy was just as disposable as the rest of us. I turned and walked toward the elevator. An hour later, at the precinct, Leo met me in the waiting area. The bail hearing is set for tomorrow morning, Leo said. The charges are severe: grand larceny, forgery, securities fraud, but the judge might grant bail if a family member posts bond. The amount will be set at $2 million. He looked at me. He knew the answer, but he had to ask. Do you want to post it? I thought about the rain on the night I left. I thought about the 4 foster homes. I thought about the smell of bleach and the feeling of the brass gear cutting into my heel. I thought about the $5 million they had stolen from my siblings. No, I said. They will go to Rikers Island until the trial. Leo warned. It will be brutal for them. They are not built for prison. They are not built for anything, I said. They have been carried their whole lives. It is time they learn to walk on their own. I stood up. Let the system handle it, I said, repeating the words my father had used to dismiss my entire existence 15 years ago. That is what it is there for. I walked out of the station. The sun was setting, casting long, gray shadows across the pavement. I felt lighter. The final gear had clicked into place. The mechanism of their destruction was self-winding. All I had to do was stand back and watch it run. The courtroom was a theater of sterile wood and fluorescent light. A place designed to strip away the veneer of society and reveal the raw, ugly mechanics of the truth. I sat in the front row, my back straight, my hands folded in my lap. To my right sat Bella, looking pale but resolute. To my left was Leo, his presence a silent wall of support. And across the aisle, in the defendant's box, sat Richard and Catherine Graymont. They were not wearing their bespoke suits or designer gowns today. They were dressed in the drab, humiliating gray of the county detention center. The transformation was startling, without the armor of wealth. My father looked shrunken, an old man with thinning hair and trembling hands. My mother looked hollow, her face devoid of the makeup that had been her mask for 40 years. They looked at me. Their eyes were not filled with remorse. They were filled with a venomous, concentrated hatred. I could read the words on their lips before they even spoke them. Cold, heartless, unnatural. The trial had been swift. The evidence, the forged documents, the forensic ink analysis, Bella's testimony, and the paper trail of the stolen trust funds was overwhelming. The jury had deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts, the foreman had announced. Now, it was time for sentencing. The judge, a stern woman with eyes that had seen too many broken families, looked down at the paperwork. She cleared her throat and turned her gaze toward me. "Ms. Gray," the judge said, "as the primary victim of the attempted fraud and the target of the identity theft, the court grants you the opportunity to speak. Do you wish to make a victim impact statement? Do you wish to request leniency for your parents based on family ties?" The room went silent. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her machine. My parents leaned forward slightly. I saw a flicker of hope in my mother's eyes. She thought that perhaps, at the very end, the biological imperative would kick in. She thought I might break. I stood up. The wood of the bench felt solid beneath my hand. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second. In the darkness behind my eyelids, I saw the spiral staircase of the Blackwood Heights estate. I saw a 13-year-old girl sitting in the shadows, listening to the rain, holding a sharp brass gear until her hand bled. I heard the clock stop. I felt the crushing weight of being the leftover, the line item crossed out in red ink. I opened my eyes. I looked at the judge. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady and clear in the quiet room. 15 years ago, the defendants in this room taught me a very valuable lesson about economics. They taught me about asset management. They taught me that when a component of a system becomes a liability, when it drains resources without providing value, it must be removed to save the integrity of the whole. I turned my head slowly to look at Richard and Catherine. They decided I was a depreciation cost. I continued. They cut me loose to balance their ledger. It was a cold, calculated business decision, and it was the best thing they ever did for me. Because in the silence of my abandonment, I learned how to build a mechanism that actually works. I turned back to the judge. They are asking for mercy based on the title of parent. But a parent is a function, not just a title. It requires maintenance, care, and investment. They provided none of that. They are rusted gears that have ground the lives of 3 children into dust. If you leave them in society, they will continue to break everything they touch. I took a deep breath. So, to answer your question, Your Honor, no. I do not ask for leniency. I am applying the lesson they taught me. I am removing the liability. I am saying no. My mother let out a strangled sob. My father slammed his fist on the table, his face turning a blotchy purple. "You are a monster," he screamed, the bailiffs moving instantly to restrain him. "I gave you life. You are the blood of my blood." "I am steel," I said softly. Though nobody heard it over the gavel, the judge sentenced them to 12 years in a federal penitentiary for grand larceny, securities fraud, and aggravated identity theft. It was over, but there was one last thing I had to do. The machine needed a final calibration. 2 weeks later, I went to the correctional facility. The visiting room was a stark contrast to my workshop. It was cold, smelling of industrial cleaner and despair. I sat on a metal stool on one side of a thick plexiglass barrier. My parents were brought in separately. but I had requested a joint visit. They sat on the other side. They looked older now, the reality of their sentence having settled into their bones. When they saw me, my mother started crying. It was a practiced, wheedling cry. "Evelyn," she whimpered into the phone receiver. "Please, you have to help us. The appeals process is expensive. We can't stay here. We are your parents. How can you sleep at night knowing we are in this cage?" My father took the phone from her. "You made your point," he growled. "You won. Now get us out. You have the money. You have the connections. Don't be spiteful." They still didn't get it. They thought this was a game. They thought this was a negotiation. I reached into my bag. The guard watched me closely, but I had already cleared the item at the security checkpoint. I placed a small object on the metal ledge beneath the glass. It was a watch. It was not a Rolex. It was not a Patek Philippe. It was a small, battered pocket watch with a cracked porcelain face. The casing was scratched tin. It was the very first watch I had repaired at the orphanage, using a paperclip and a nail file. "Look at it," I said into the phone. My father frowned. "What is this junk?" "That is me," I said. "That is the girl you threw away. When I found that watch, it was dead. The mainspring was snapped. It belonged in the trash, but I forced it to run. I made it keep time using parts I scavenged from the dirt." I leaned in closer to the glass. "It runs on the energy of survival. Richard, it does not need you. It never needed you." I looked at my mother. "You say you gave me life," I said. "That is a biological fact. But you did not give me a life. I built that myself. I raised myself in the dark while you played house in the light. The debt you think I owe you for my existence, it has been paid in full by 15 years of silence." I stood up. I left the watch on the ledge. "Evelyn!" my mother screamed, slapping her palm against the glass. "Don't you dare walk away. I am your mother. Goodbye, Catherine. Goodbye, Richard." I turned my back. I heard them shouting. I heard my father cursing my name. I heard my mother begging, but the sounds were muffled, like the ticking of a clock wrapped in cotton. I walked through the heavy steel doors. I walked through the security checkpoint. I walked out into the sunlight. I did not look back. Not once. I drove straight to the shop. The sign above the door, sterling gray, glinted in the afternoon sun. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air was cool and smelled of cedar and oil. It was the smell of home. Bella was at the apprentice bench. She was wearing a loop, her brow furrowed in concentration as she polished a brass escapement wheel. She looked up when I entered. She looked tired, but her eyes were clear. She was healing. "Did you do it?" she asked. "It is done," I said. Leo walked out of the office, holding a tablet. "The transfer to the Blind Trust is complete. The Arthur Sterling Foundation just received its first grant, and the Heritage Foundation called. They want to schedule the unveiling for tonight." I nodded. I walked to the center of the room. There it stood, the Celestial Heart. It was magnificent, a tower of brass, gold, and iron, standing 8 feet tall. It was a model of the universe, with gears representing the planets, the moons, and the stars. It had been silent for half a century. "Is it ready?" Bella asked, stepping down from her stool. "It has been ready for a long time," I said. It was just waiting for the right hand to start it. I approached the massive machine. I reached into the heart of the mechanism, where the great pendulum hung suspended, motionless. I felt the cold metal against my skin. I thought about the stopped clock in the hallway of my childhood. I thought about the silence that had defined my life. I took a breath. I pushed the pendulum. Tick. The sound was deep, resonant, like the heartbeat of a giant. Talk. The gears began to turn. The escapement clicked. The celestial spheres began their slow, majestic orbit. The room filled with the sound of time, not the frantic, desperate time of my parents, running from their debts, but the steady, powerful time of the universe. I watched the gears mesh perfectly. No friction, no rust, no rot. Bella smiled. Leo put a hand on my shoulder. I looked at the clock, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see a machine. I saw myself. I saw the survivor. I saw the architect. I smiled. The tears that finally fell were not tears of sadness. They were the release of a pressure valve that had been holding for 15 years. The clock ticked on, strong and eternal, and this time, I was the one holding the key. Time finally belonged to me. Thank you so much for listening to Evelyn's story of resilience and justice. I would love to know where you are tuning in from right now. Are you listening on your commute, at the gym, or relaxing at home? Please let me know in the comments below so we can connect. If you enjoyed seeing the Time Witch take back her power, please subscribe to the Veronica Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button to help this story reach even more people who need to hear that it is never too late to fix what is broken. Stay strong.